Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to actually the last webinar of the training program. We will be sending out a very short survey next week with respect to the entire webinar series. We're hoping we'll be able to access more funding so that we can continue, but the recorded ones will be there if you want to access them in the future, and of course we'll keep you posted if we do receive additional funding. So as you know, I'll be talking this afternoon about keeping kids safe, both in the real and virtual worlds. I'm going to look at the current trends in prevention and look at the assumptions that we've made over the years about kids and safety, the mixed messages that we've given them in the past. And I do want to emphasize that I don't want anybody to feel bad that they've given some messages that we now know aren't appropriate, or we've changed some of the messages. Because some of this information for a lot of people is relatively new, depending on how old you are. We all grew up with messages that we now know aren't particularly helpful for kids. I always go on the premise that we always do the best that we can do to keep kids safe. Hopefully after today, this will be helpful with additional, more up-to-date information. And then the other piece is I do have more information in the PowerPoint than I'm sure I'm going to be able to cover, but I left it in because I thought that people might find it helpful for your own work if you do any presentations for staff or parents and caregivers. So for example, a lot of the quotes, I'll just say that here's a quote. And I have links to videos, short videos, clips that I think are helpful, which you'll be able to watch on your own time. And then I can also follow it up with some other handouts that we use if people would find that helpful. So for people who haven't joined us for a webinar before, Signe is here with me. She monitors if people have questions or if for whatever reason you're not able to hear. So she's always looking at that. And so I will leave some time at the end for questions. Unless you have a real pressing question, you can send it, of course. And that's our plan for this afternoon. So I like to call this presentation, as you can see, Debunking the Stranger Danger Myth. We spend a lot of time with organizations trying to encourage people to stop, frankly, from using the term stranger danger, from focusing on strangers, and also from using the term street proofing, which is still out there quite a bit. And as everybody knows, most kids are harmed by someone they or the family know and trust, and yet the focus has always been on strangers. I think part of that might be because it wasn't socially acceptable, if you will, to talk about child abuse, sexual abuse out loud until some of these prevention programs started to appear in the schools in the early 80s. So there are lots of studies, particularly, for us, the Ontario Incidence Study. There's one in every province and territory, and the Canadian Incidence Study that reinforces the percentage of kids who are victimized by someone they know and trust. And this is a common statistic all around the world. So the prevention community has had to work at. Of course, we don't want to minimize or not acknowledge that children can also be harmed by strangers. So how do we word these messages that encompass everyone, frankly, including peers, because many children are victimized by peers or siblings. So we here at Boost use the term personal safety as opposed to stranger danger or street proofing. So I'm going to intersperse the online and offline information safety as we go along. So this is typically what we present to kids, what we present to families, that the person on the other end of the internet, you don't know who the person is, and the person is pretty much always shown as someone who's creepy, someone who's a predator, someone who's lonely. And so the question is this true? Is this false? And there's so much information that we give to kids that now that we have a little bit more research in this area, although it is an area lacking the online exploitation research, is this true, not true, and should we be telling them what we've been telling them all along? And of course, it's false. I won't go through all the stats, but again, like offline victimization, online victimization, largely, to a large extent, the children, the youth know the offender from an offline relationship, and that includes the making of child sexual abuse images, that they actually know the person in some capacity, or the person's known to the family. So I think we have to stop telling kids, particularly some of the older kids, about who they may or may not be speaking to. We have to refine those messages, and I'll come back to that in a little while. The other piece that I certainly come across, and maybe some of you do, is the idea, and I put in quotation marks, well, in terms of the child sexual abuse images, what the criminal code obviously refers to as child pornography, is that, well, what's the harm in, quote unquote, just looking? And I think it's important to reinforce to people, although it's obvious to us, that real children are being abused offline in the real world in order to create these images, and the type of sexual, emotional, and physical implications for that. So take that opportunity, I suggest, when you can. So when we look at prevention programs that were and are, some of them still popular today, many of them in the past never took the developmental perspective into account. So although the concepts were clear to adults, children didn't understand developmentally, can't understand the same way that we do. And what we'll spend a bit of time on are two very important concepts, and that is secrets and strangers, where we think when we use those words and messages around those words that children understand the same way we do, and they don't. Now that doesn't mean that we're still not talking about it, we're still not rehearsing things with kids, but we have to have realistic expectations. So we haven't had realistic expectations of kids using these materials and giving them these messages, and that's one of the reasons why children and youth have had difficulty following through on the strategies that they've been taught. And unfortunately, and again, no one's done this on purpose, obviously, but instead of promoting disclosure, it turns out that we've inhibited disclosure, because even though we've given kids strategies, if they're unrealistic, who are they going to blame for victimization? Themselves. And often the offender has been very successful in making children and youth feel that they're to blame to begin with. And so as a result, they haven't come forward and told anybody what's happened. And then their inappropriate prevention messages can also add to the impact of abuse, depending on what a child has been told and what they've experienced. And I'll give some examples as we go along. So let me give you an example. Some of you may remember the prevention story, The Secret of the Silver Horse. There were over 1 million copies distributed throughout Canada in English and French. If you look in that book, it says that it's appropriate for kids ages 5 to 12. Well, developmentally, a 5-year-old thinks very differently than a 12-year-old. So it would be really difficult to think that one story like this would be appropriate for all ages. And it also has some concepts in it that are difficult, like The Secret, and some contradictions. So these types of materials we encourage people not to be using anymore. So what are some of the assumptions that we've made about prevention? And again, we're going to look at specific messages and either suggest that we tweak them, so to speak, or we abandon them. So a very common message that we all grew up with, I think, and kids today are told all the time is if anyone is making you feel uncomfortable, touching you in a way that you don't like, you have the right, you should say no or stop. So I think generally that's still a good message. However, we all know that abusers are more powerful than their victims, whether it's physically, intellectually, they rely on that person for caregiving, and it might be really unrealistic for a child to say no. It might be very frightening for a child to say no. We also give them a mixed message when we say respect your elders, obey adults. When we send our kids off to school, we often say listen to the teacher, don't get in trouble with the principal. And then we turn around and say, well, in this one particular circumstance, you can say no. And so it's pretty unrealistic that all kids will be able to do this. So what we've added to this is you have the right to say no to anyone who's making you feel uncomfortable. Two things, even someone you know well, adding that piece because that's been left off, and it may be too scary to say no. That's okay. Talk to someone you trust about what happened. We have clients that come here to Boost for assessment and treatment who talk about situations that they were in. They couldn't see any way out except to allow, and I put allow in quotation marks, the offender to do what he or she wanted to do, so that it would happen, it would be over, and then they would be able to escape. They would be able to get out. So if all we've said is say no or stop, then that would be a very unhelpful message for a child who decided that the strategy was to, as I say, allow the assault to happen. And so if they don't get the other message, it may be too scary to say no, and that's okay. You do the best you can. We get that. So that's why those two pieces have been added. And of course, even someone you know well, because in the past it's always focused on strangers. There are a lot of materials that talk about good touch, bad touch. This is also a difficult one for many reasons. One being, as I'm sure you all know, in the grooming process, some of this touch actually feels good. It doesn't make the child feel uncomfortable, particularly very young children who don't have a social sense yet of what's appropriate or inappropriate, and so they don't understand what's happening. Lots of young kids, because they are so concrete in their thinking, interpret bad touch to mean if it was a bad touch, I am a bad girl or I am a bad boy. So this is a little bit problematic. The other piece is that we really want kids to try and tap into what adults call your intuitive feeling, your gut feeling. Young kids refer to something that makes them feel yucky, or the uh-oh feeling. Some of them call it the spidey feelings. There are materials and presentations that talk about the spidey feeling, and older kids talk about that they were creeped out or weirded out. That's more the language they use. So we think it's important to talk about touch that makes you feel good, touch that makes you feel bad, touch that makes you feel uncomfortable, to give the message and help kids to connect the feeling with the touching. And again, it's not a perfect message, but I think it's refined a little bit more. We've also continue to focus on private parts, and or sometimes they talk about private parts, or the information will say where the bathing suit covers. And we all know that in the grooming process, I mean, usually offenders are not so intrusive at the very beginning, and lots of kids begin to feel creepy with touch that's in the grooming process, except that we've only talked about private parts. And so what can go through a child's head is, oh, this is making me feel yucky, but she's not touching me in my private part, so I guess it's okay, or I guess maybe there's something wrong with me. And they don't disclose early on in the process when they are beginning to feel uncomfortable. We're also, frankly, denying the fact that human beings are sexual from, the tip of our heads to the tip of our toes. And it's not just our private parts, quote unquote, that are sexual. So again, we encourage people not to focus on the private parts. We also have made exceptions, in the past. No one should touch you in your private parts except the doctor or the nurse. And we would also encourage that people not make exceptions like that, because frankly, until an individual is old enough to be with a healthcare provider without a protective adult with him or her, the protective adult should be there. So again, we've changed that message, worked on changing that message to all touching can be talked about. Only you can decide how a touch makes you feel. And we're not just talking about abuse when we're talking about touch. That's the other piece. We're trying to make sure that we weave in kids understanding healthy relationships and healthy touch. Healthy touch is very important, as we all know, in terms of being a human being, so that we're not focusing just on that sexual piece. And we're hoping that if we say all touch, that kids will come to us early on if they're feeling uncomfortable. We do acknowledge, however, that depending on your family values, depending on your culture, that there are different beliefs about touch. And for a lot of kids, the message only you can decide how a touch makes you feel simply isn't true for them. I mean, I know as a kid, and many of you may have the same kinds of memories, that at family gatherings, you had to go around the room and let all your relatives and aunts and uncles, kiss you and hug you and, slobber all over you, and you didn't have the option of saying no. So that's been changing over time. So messages about touch are also about respect. They're also about privacy. They're also about boundaries and healthy sexuality and touch as part of a healthy relationship with anyone. So the next piece and the assumptions we've made is we do spend a lot of time with children and youth, and I wouldn't say to stop, but again, to be realistic. And we talk about situations. So, typical situations. What would you do if someone came up to you and told you they've lost their puppy, or their child has lost the puppy and they need help finding the puppy? Or what would you do if someone sent you a message or an image or whatever that was offensive or that upset you? Oh, I'd shut the computer. Well, kids can sit and parrot back anything, really, that we teach them. That doesn't mean that they would be able to do it. It doesn't mean that we should assume or expect that they should be able to do it. And most of this is because there are emotions involved. So it doesn't take much, really, to engage a child, particularly a young child, if someone says something like, oh, your mommy's been in a terrible accident, and if you don't come with me right away, you know, she's maybe going to die and you won't be able to say no. And, you know, I would guarantee that pretty much every child would go. Even as an adult, we would have to stop for a moment and remind ourselves that the only people who would be coming to us with that kind of news would be a police officer or somebody that we knew. And it's easy, you know, I use the example of a fire. We can all rehearse what we've been taught about what you have to do if you are somewhere and a fire breaks out and there's a fire. However, unless we've had the unfortunate experience of actually being somewhere where there's a fire, you really don't know if you'll be able to, well, what's the first thing? Keep calm. That's number one. So I think, again, there's no harm in rehearsing situations with kids, but we should never, ever, ever blame them if they cannot follow through on the strategies that they have rehearsed. So we tell kids all the time, we end almost all of our messages with, you know, talk to an adult you trust, even if you feel confused, if you're embarrassed, if you're scared. And, you know, we help them identify at least 3 adults that they could go to that they trust. This can be particularly difficult for newcomers who are not yet integrated into their community, into their school. And also, we did an evaluation of one of our prevention programs, asking kids who they would go to if they had a problem or a worry. That's the language that we like to use. And way on the top, of course, was mom or dad, and then came the teacher. The lady in the front office was a very common response, which is great. But we know that these people aren't available on holidays, you know, March break, Christmas, summers, and so it's an exercise that has to be repeated. We also have to make sure that people that kids, particularly younger kids, are telling us that who they would go to is someone that is accessible. So, you know, one of the cute stories is when I was interviewing this little boy, 5 or 6 years old, and again, you know, if you had a problem or a worry, you know, who would you go to for help? And then most kids, as I said, would say mom or teacher, whomever. And then we would say, well, you know, if mom maybe was on a trip, or, you know, who else could you go to? So he looks at me and he says, well, I would call George Bush. So somewhere along the line, you know, he got the message that the President of the United States saves everybody, and thought that he could pick up the phone and call the President. So we just want to make sure that they're identifying easily accessible individuals that they trust who could help them. One of the other messages that we give to kids, which you know, is always an uncomfortable one for me, is keep telling until you get the help you need. Not because the first person you tell may not be interested in helping you, but may not really understand what you need or what you're asking, and so you keep telling until you get the help you need. Because for some kids, unfortunately, the first adult they tell isn't, just for many different reasons, isn't able to assist them. So some of the specific mixed messages that again, nobody has created these things on purpose, but it's distinguishing between the tattling and telling. I mean, everybody knows tattling is to get someone into trouble, telling is to get help. And we have a tendency when kids come to us, again, particularly the younger kids, is to first of all say, well, that, you know, they're tattling. You know, we do this with our own kids, with siblings. I don't want to hear any more stories about, you know, how your brother tormented you this afternoon or whatever. And in fact, we haven't taken the time to find out, you know, what exactly happened. And so for some, and we have a tendency, again, with young kids to use the phrase, well, you know, try and work it out, use your words, without knowing that what has happened and that this child may have actually used all the strategies that at 4 years old they know. You know, asking nicely, doing a little negotiating, you know, threatening, you can't come to my birthday party if I can't have a turn with the toy, and getting so frustrated and eventually, you know, pushing the child down and grabbing it or whatever it is. We also know that the research is clear. Kids who have low self-esteem, poor problem-solving skills, poor communication skills are at a higher risk of victimization, whether it's forms of bullying or child abuse. And so this is also part of building their repertoire of skills, problem-solving skills, communication skills. And so I think it's really important that we take the time to do that, to figure out what happened. And then, you know, we have a tendency, I use the example, you know, a child comes home and says, I got a detention. I think most of us kind of look at our kid and say, what did you do? Particularly if, you know, our child's had some issues in the past, instead of saying, well, what happened? And so their experience is that, you know, we've basically accused them right away without knowing really what happened. And so if something else more serious happens, they become a victim of abuse, violence, then they feel that they can't come to us because we really haven't spent the time in the past to find out what's been going on. So we may have thought we were on their list as someone trusted that they could go to, but in fact, for them, we're not on their list anymore. Another piece that's become a lot more difficult for all of us because of social media, internet, you know, communication that comes screaming at us even when we're trying to avoid it, is when something happens to a child, to a youth in the community. And many of us, and again, we do it out of fear for our children and the children in the community, and we want to keep them safe, and might use scare tactics with kids. You know, we see that's why you need to come home right after school because, you know, that could happen to you. Well, you know, our kids know that could happen to them because their friend in their class isn't there anymore because, you know, something has happened, or a couple of kids in school were sexually assaulted on their way home, or, you know, whatever the situation is. And it's also really anxiety producing for kids to talk about things like, you know, even the crossing guard could do something, even the bus driver, even this, even that. You know, everybody wants their children to feel comfortable in their communities, and we don't want them to feel sometimes, frankly, how we feel when we're nervous about the safety of our children and youth, is we feel uncomfortable, we feel nervous for them. I know I don't want any kid to feel like that, walking to school and going to the park and that type of thing. And we want kids to respond to behavior, not specific people. So, you know, the message is anyone who, you know, does this or says that, you know, it doesn't matter who it is. So I think that we have to abandon those scare tactics, and really, frankly, what kids need to hear when something has happened. You know, we've been involved in situations where a stranger has walked into a school and sexually assaulted you know, a child in a bathroom. And, you know, I was involved with a school at one time providing support, and the answer, you know, they were very reactive, and I'm not blaming them, I mean, it's pretty scary, was if anyone had to go to the bathroom, well, the whole class went. You know, they all walked together and waited outside the, you know, the bathroom door. And so the message that you're giving to the kids is this isn't a safe place. I mean, we all have to stick together, and nobody can go anywhere with a buddy or by themselves. And what kids need to hear, first of all, is most people want to help children, because with all the media, it feels like it's just not safe to be anywhere. So we want kids to know that, you know, most people don't hurt children. Most people want to help children, and they need to know what we're doing to keep them safe. Whether, you know, locking the doors, if it's your own child, you know, that's why mommy and daddy, or, you know, whomever, sleep with our door open so we can, you know, we can hear if you need us, you know, et cetera, and to stay away from those messages that make them a lot more anxious. A little bit of anxiety, you know, a little bit of stress is helpful in the sense of, you know, making us aware, mobilizing ourselves, but a lot of anxiety and stress, as you know, is going to make it more difficult to cope with different situations that come our way. So that's one of the quotes I was telling you about. So when you have time, I hope you'll read it. So let's look at some specific developmental factors. I like to show this picture and then ask people, you know, how old do you think this baby is? And I get all different kinds of ages. No one as yet has pinpointed the age of this child, who actually is 12 days old. And we all know that the recommendations are no screen time under age 2. Well, this little boy is sitting on mom's lap. Dad is away on a business trip, and she's sending dad an email, but doing it from the baby's perspective. Hi, daddy, you know, blah, blah, blah. So certainly when I grew up, there was no such thing as the internet, computers. We didn't have to worry about this. Now we have to be concerned about this with kids from a very, very young age. I mean, frankly, I've seen a 2-year-old in a high chair navigating a mouse with a computer. It was mind-boggling, actually. And, you know, we go out for dinner, and lots of times we see the kids, each of the children at the table, youth, engaged on their tablet or their phone. You know, I don't have to tell you the risks that that are very concerning, and the risks change and develop as the capacity of the internet does. So what are the two main developmental pieces that I want to talk about this afternoon are secrets and strangers. So again, young kids are very concrete thinkers. They cannot think abstractly, and it does have an impact on the concepts related to primary prevention and the messages that we give kids. So the first one being a secret. So what is a secret from the adult perspective? Well, you all know it's something that you don't share with anyone else. I mean, it's simple, easy. However, when you ask young children what a secret is, what you get in some way, shape, or form, no matter what, is the actual concrete piece, the whispering piece. So they typically define a secret as something that is whispered into someone's ear, and it doesn't matter what the content is. It's the concrete action of whispering. And so that changes a lot of pieces for us. Again, I'm not saying we don't talk to kids about secrets, but we have got to be realistic of what their interpretation is. It's not till they mature, not till they're somewhat older, that they understand a secret is about the content, about something that is being hidden, not about whispering. And I can tell you, when I did the interviews, I interviewed about 200 children, and all the young ones, you know, 4 or 5-year-olds, when I asked them if they knew, you know, what's a secret, every single one would either stand up and come around the table and whisper their definition into my ear, or they would cup their hands around their mouth and whisper. There wasn't one that actually just sat there and told me what they thought a secret was without some kind of whispering action, so to speak. So here are some examples of what some of the kids from our study had said. The first one, a preschooler. When we say, well, whispering in the ear at Christmas, I stayed up till 12 o'clock and I saw Santa. So she said the whispering in the ear. Then an 8-year-old, something you don't want to tell someone unless they've done something to hurt you. So, you know, that's much, much better. You can see, obviously, the concept has come a long way. And then this 11-year-old boy, When people are saying things like what I was doing with my girlfriend, then he stands up, literally puts his face against my face and screams at me, but I don't even got a girlfriend. So not only does he understand secrets, but he also understands rumors. He's obviously been the victim of kids spreading rumors about him. And this boy was 11. So by then, he seems to have the full, all the concepts around secrets. So we all know that abuse is done under a veil of secrecy, and we would encourage you to not talk about good and bad secrets. Our message is there are no secrets about touch. No one should ever tell you to keep a secret from your mom or your dad. All touching can be talked about. And we know that offenders use the secret piece to their advantage. It's actually probably the best, pretty much the best weapon they have, convincing, manipulating, threatening kids into keeping the secret. And so, you know, they'll say things, this is a special secret, this is our good secret, you know, don't tell the secret because your parents would be really mad if they knew I was paying special attention to you and not your sister or your brother, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then what complicates things even further for kids is kids are very, very rule-bound. You know, you hear that all the time in schoolyard, you know, you broke the rule, you're not supposed to this, when they're playing a game or whatever. So when you ask kids what's the rule about secrets, easy for them. You don't tell. And it's about the rule. For older kids, it's about loyalty. When a peer tells them a secret, and even though they may feel uncomfortable about hearing this secret and they know on their gut level they should tell someone, but they don't want to be disloyal to their friend. So again, I'm going to show you some examples from the kids that we interviewed. So we asked them, if your friend told you to keep a touch a secret, what would you do? Okay, or a touch that made you feel uncomfortable, what would you do? Well, for the preschoolers, this was really easy. Keep it a secret because I know they're my friends and I wouldn't tell a secret to somebody else. So very simple, not complicated for them, and no cognitive dissonance around this. A 5-year-old, I wouldn't tell anyone because that person would be angry at me because they didn't want anyone else to know, because, you know, the rule about secrets is you just don't tell anybody. It's as if we hadn't said, you know, touched you in a way that made you feel uncomfortable. Then we get to an 8-year-old who said, I would just forget about it because, I mean, the touch is over. So, I mean, for this child, I think, you know, they know, they have this sense, wait a minute, it's a touch that I wasn't happy about, I should tell, but this is my friend, I can't even deal with this, and just, you know, sort of, it's over, forget it. Then we come to this 10-year-old. Keep it a secret, but it depends on what kind of touch. If it hurt or made me feel bad, then I wouldn't keep it a secret. If it was a nice touch, I would. That's better, much better. But then we've got, you know, the other complicating factors about the grooming touches, but still really coming along nicely as far as the perception and understanding the concept. Another 10-year-old, tell them not to do that again. Tell them to be gentle. And if they did it again, I would tell an adult. So again, you know, difficult situation to deal with, but this child's strategy was, well, I'm going to teach this person how I should be touched. And then, you know, they get a second chance. And, you know, some of this is difficult for adults too, never mind just kids. And then an 11-year-old, keep telling someone till they believed me. So this child has the whole package, the whole concept, but I mean, we do know that disclosure can also be inhibited by the offender and grooming tactics, et cetera, but we know conceptually they appear to have it all. And then what do we do as adults? And nobody does it on purpose, is we give kids mixed messages. And the role modeling, our role modeling, everybody's role modeling is so important. So, you know, we say things like, don't tell Dad, we just spent $200 at the shoe store. Or don't tell Mom, you know, I let you have chocolate just before dinner, or, you know, whatever. And really a lot of what we're talking about are surprises. And instead we use the word secret. So I always make the joke, you know, don't tell Dad we spent $200 in the shoe store. Let it be a surprise when the Visa bill comes. So the point being that if we're planning, you know, for example, a surprise party for someone, maybe in a child care center for the director or whatever, is to say we're going to have a surprise party for Jody, but we're not going to say anything until tomorrow when she comes into the room because it's going to be a big surprise. Not using the word secret, because this is really confusing to tell them one thing and then for us to be using secret when we should be using the word surprise. And obviously a surprise is something that eventually is going to get, it's going to be revealed. So I think we have a lot of work to do around terminology and not giving kids these mixed messages. This was part of a campaign, October Child Abuse Prevention Month, that we did here at Boost. And the quote that I put below it, it's old, but it's still very relevant. The secrecy is both the source of fear and the promise of safety. And children believe that the consequences, should they tell, are going to be terrible. And, you know, for some, those come true. We won't deny it. And for others, as I said, they've been manipulated and terrified into keeping the secret of victimization. So if we go, a little bit of the online piece here is, and whether it's online or offline, the point is that once the offender builds an emotional tie with the child or youth, then they can unfortunately pretty easily use blaming and shaming and blackmail threats to make, if you will, victims keep the secret, to stop them from disclosing, you know, even saying things like, well, we're partners in this. If you tell, we're both going to get in trouble, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that we often say to kids is, well, if anybody ever hurt you, if anybody ever touched you, you know, I'd kill them. Well, that's a pretty frightening thing to kids, and it's enough actually to for them not to disclose, because they may actually think that someone in their family will go out and kill the person who's hurting them. And then we know that offenders also groom parents and caregivers. And one of the things that they do is they point out when kids lie, so that if a child does disclose, they say, well, you know, you've seen so many times that your kid has lied about this, lied about that. You know, this is just a lie to get me into trouble or whatever. And then, of course, they say things that we all like to hear, and saying that, you know, anybody who does this to a child, anyone who creates child pornographic images should be thrown in jail, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then what's very distressing is that even for some kids, when they do disclose, in many cases, offenders convince parents and caregivers not to call authorities, and they convince parents that what happened was consensual. And for those of you who, you know, have had an opportunity to see or hear Marcella Leonard's presentations or the webinar she did for us, and I encourage you to listen to it, it is really hard to get your head around when something's happened online and the child is in the room alone and yet has done some things that has been manipulated into doing things that you just can't imagine somebody would do if they had the choice, if they were by themselves. And so that's another piece where offenders are successful at convincing, well, it was consensual, you know, he wanted to do it, he agreed to do it, he fully participated, nobody was stopping him. So the other pieces around internet exploitation And, you know, we try very hard to keep kids safe. We keep giving them the message, talk to someone you trust, talk to someone you trust. But then the internet exploitation adds so many other layers. And I think I would suspect all of you are you know, familiar with this. We have been telling kids since they became engaged with computers, since they could understand from an early age, anything you put on the net stays there forever. So be careful what you put on the net. So when they've been victimized, you know, sexual exploitation over the internet, that message has been well drummed into them that anything there is there forever. It's never going to end. Their pictures are there to be, so they could be victimized over and over and over again. And it's a pretty disconcerting, terrifying thought for these children and youth. They've also lost control over disclosure. They have no idea, you know, who's going to be seeing these, when they're going to see them, if they're going to be recognized, and you know, they've lost that control. And as much as we want them to come to us, this, as I said, these are extra layers. And then there's another piece. So many of these children are in these images smiling. They've been forced to smile, and we don't see or hear what's gone on behind the scenes. And so they are very, very frightened. And the offender also reinforces this, that it looks like they fully participated, they consented, they allowed it because they're smiling. So we need to really understand these pieces and help others understand these pieces, so that we never say to a child, I don't understand, why didn't you come and talk to me? Why didn't you, you know, I've always told you, you can come to me. The other piece about coming to an adult you trust is it's important to make it okay for kids not to come to parents. So as a parent, and it's a hard thing to say actually, but to say to your kids, you know, I would really hope that if anything happened that made you feel uncomfortable, you know, you'd come to me or you'd go to your dad, but you know what, if you didn't want to, like, I get it, that's okay. And help them identify who else they could go to. Doesn't mean you don't have a good relationship with your children, but a lot of this is frightening, it's embarrassing, and we hope there's a higher chance they would go to someone else if they didn't feel comfortable coming to you. Lots of times kids are threatened. The offender says, you know, now I have this picture of you, and if you don't do this, if you don't do that, I'm going to spread it all around. And unfortunately, kids don't realize that it's most likely already been distributed. And kids are afraid that police or child protection might get involved. So these are, as I said, all extra layers that as much as we're working so hard to keep them safe online, these are pieces that interfere. So again, not to reinforce about not blaming kids, particularly if we come to understand what the pictures were like, what they did, the sexual details that they know about now, or they communicated back and forth. You know, how could you write such things? How did you even get this information? How could you have touched yourself like that? And so really we need to try and understand, you know, what was happening behind the scenes that this child ended up doing these things, and to remember that, you know, we just don't have the full story. And if we want them, again, to come forward, and we want them to keep on telling us, and if we want to be able to support them, because we know how important that is for children who either disclose or the abuse has been discovered, these are also important pieces in terms of helping to keep kids safe. So let's move on and switch now to strangers. So pretty easy, adults know, you know, what's a stranger? Someone you don't know. That's pretty much the end of the story. But for younger kids, when you ask them what's a stranger, they use 3 key criteria. The first one is how someone looks. And pretty much all the time when you talk to kids about, what's a stranger, the stranger is always a man, and the stranger is someone who is, they describe them as kind of scruffy looking. A lot of kids will say, kind of like that homeless guy. And it's interesting, I did a presentation yesterday with camp counselors. The group was anywhere from 16 to 25, and one of the young ladies put up her hand and said, just when you said that, it gave me the image right away of a homeless guy. So, I mean, that's pretty prevalent. Then another criteria that kids use is how often they've seen or had contact with the person. So we've been telling kids for years, referring to the stranger, you don't even know who you're talking to on the other end of the computer, and we talk about strangers. And, as soon as kids, not just kids, adults, frankly, start communicating with someone online, they're not a stranger to them. And I would encourage you to really just take that word out of your vocabulary when you're talking to kids about safety. And just say anyone you've met online. I mean, and that covers everyone, because there's a lot of times when we talk to kids about, the stranger, I mean, they've already blown us off, like they're not listening to what we have to say, because what do we know? We think they're talking to a stranger and they're not. And then the other piece that they determine, that they use criteria in terms of the stranger, is they watch our interaction with that person. So if, whenever I do training, whether it's child care teachers, whomever it is, and I say to them, if I come into your classroom and you greet me in a very friendly, welcoming kind of a way, other than, personality traits, pretty much every kid will answer all my questions, because they trust and respect you, and they see that you are friendly toward me. I have one of my very good friends is a police officer, and her son is now 20, but when he was younger, he had never met me, but she had talked about me, and she swore up and down that there's no way her kid would ever do something like this. And I called her one day at home, and it wasn't a setup, trust me, and he answered the phone, and I knew his name, and I said, hi, it's, Mommy's friend Pearl. He answered every single question I asked him, and he would have probably given me any information I wanted. So, I mean, this is a developmental piece. It's a piece that we can't fix, so to speak. Lots of times we tell kids, don't answer the phone, when you come home after school or whatever, unless you see on the call display, it's mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, whomever. And then we find out after they tell us somebody called and they ask questions, and the child answered all the questions, and we're so frustrated. How many times have we talked about this? But if the person knows the name, hi, is your mom Mrs. Reimer there? If it's a child, they will answer every single question. Not because they've forgotten what you've taught them, but because of the familiarity. That person is not a stranger, because they knew the family name. So, I'll share a quick personal experience. One of my kids who was 13, and I come home from work and I say, I'm just going to pop out, do some groceries, I'll be back in about 20 minutes. Come back, and there's a business card on the kitchen counter. And I didn't think it had been there before, so I call him down and I say, I don't remember this. Do you know where it came from? So he says to me, yeah, some man who came to the door. So of course my response is, well, we've talked about this before. You're not to open up the door to anybody unless it's, so-and-so, so-and-so. And he said, oh, for heaven's sakes, Mom, a man dressed in a suit carrying a leather briefcase would never want to hurt kids. And I mean, this is a child who grows up in a home where, prevention, child abuse is not news to them. Messages, continually are not news to them. And yet, at 13, still going on how the person looks. So again, you know, we give kids the messages, but we have to have realistic expectations of how they, of their perception and how they understand these concepts. So I go back to the picture that I showed you at the beginning of the webinar. You know, we shouldn't be using this terminology with kids, which we've been doing for a long time. Even though a lot of these people are predators, there's no question. But if the child doesn't see this person, I don't mean physically see, but doesn't perceive the person as a predator, as a monster, when we use that language, you know, they're not listening to us. You know, for them, oh, we don't understand, we don't know, you know, you didn't have the internet when you were a kid. And so we've got to really try and stay away from this kind of terminology because it just makes it even more difficult to help keep them safe and to have these discussions with them. And one of the things that Marcella Leonard talks about and has really made us aware in ways that we haven't thought of before is many children and youth who are in their rooms, you know, alone and are being exploited over the internet and who have done things to themselves at the manipulation and power of the offender, and maybe have been somehow forced into recruiting other kids, they sometimes see themselves as perpetrators or perverts. And so, you know, when we're talking to kids and when we're talking to adults, and we don't know who's in that group. And so we have to really be careful of our language, and again, the message is always, you know, come to someone you trust. But if we're using this kind of language, you know, for them, we're prejudging, and we're adding characteristics or reinforcing characteristics that, you know, that aren't true. So we need to work harder, all of us, in terms of the language that we use. You know, I've talked quite a bit about this already. So over the net, someone goes from a stranger to a friend pretty quickly. They talk about, I know this person well, I love this person. So, you know, and part of this is the fact that there are cues that human beings have when they see each other. There are social cues, whether we see it in the face, in the eyes, I mean, there's a whole science around that, right? You're missing all of that when you're communicating with someone on the internet. And, you know, if it's not through something visually, it's, you know, the messaging or whatever. And that's pretty important for gut feelings and whether we want to kind of continue the conversation. And so much of that is missing. So that's a real disadvantage for our kids. In terms of risk factors, they're pretty similar to whether it's online or offline. You know, there's the list there that you can see pretty clearly. One of the ones two actually, that are quite high on the list are kids that are having real problematic relationships with their parents and poor, you know, parent-child communication. I mean, all kids have issues with their parents when they're teenagers. I mean, that's not anything new, but we're talking about pretty serious issues. And so they're on the net looking for friendship and understanding, and those kids are really at a much higher risk. And another group of children and youth or kids who are questioning their sexuality and don't feel that they can talk to a parent, a caregiver, a teacher, you know, an adult they trust, and so they go online, and again, it puts them at further risk for victimization. So, you know, big message over and over and over when we're talking to adults is around the communication piece and the non-judgmental piece with their children, and it's directly connected to keeping them safe. Another piece that, you know, I do get a lot of pushback when I'm talking to parents and when I'm talking to teachers is because we recommend do not threaten kids with taking away their cell phones, their computers, any of their technological devices if something has happened. I mean, I think it's, you know, good to have rules around, well, I don't think any of these should be in the bedroom, frankly, and certainly not at night. You know, there's research that tells us how many kids are sleeping with their phones on. I think some adults do that too. You know, they hear the ping, they wake up, they answer, whatever, and it's so hard to supervise, and supervision is so key in keeping kids safe, obviously. One of the police officers I work with, and he's got 2 teenagers, and there's him and his wife, and the rule in their house is when it's bedtime, all the chargers are in the kitchen on the kitchen counter, and everybody, including the parents, bring down their technological devices, and they get charged overnight in the kitchen, and no one has access to anything. So I'm not talking about rules like that. I'm talking about if something has happened, if we're threatening kids, you know, if I know that you've ever talked to a stranger, you know, online and this and that, I'm going to take away, well, they're not going to come and talk to us. They're not going to disclose to us. And frankly, we're blaming them for something that that is not their fault. They're young. We'll look in a minute at, you know, some of the developmental pieces in terms of adolescence, and also these devices are their lifeline. They can't even do homework anymore, frankly, without having access to the internet. So I think we really need to think about the kinds of consequences that we threaten kids with. The adolescent brain, I don't think I have to tell any of you that we now know that the human brain isn't fully developed till we're around 25, and it's the prefrontal cortex that develops last, which is responsible for all these executive functions, which our children and adolescents do not have. So, you know, what does that mean? It means that they have a harder time controlling their emotions, holding back their emotions. They like things like video games because, you know, it's high excitement and they really don't have to do much to get that excitement. They don't think ahead. They don't think of the consequences, particularly the negative consequences. And in fact, they have this mentality of, it will never happen to me. And many of us have heard our kids say, well, what do you think I am, stupid? You know, you think I don't know? That would never happen to me type of thinking. And I mean, you can't fix that. Obviously, that's developmental, and it changes, and we have to live through it and support them as best we can. And they do very risky, many kids, risky, impulsive types of things, and a lot of experimenting. And, you know, their developmental task, part of it is around exploring romantic relationships and the curiosity about sex. And, you know, that's where the internet is good in the sense you can find a lot of information, and not good because you can be easily drawn into something that you're really not aware of what's happening to you. I put in the information around sexting. Again, I make the assumption that we all know what it is, but depending on who you're talking to, I thought this might be helpful with, you know, the explanation and why people do sexting. I think it's important. This is not just for kids, but again, when you're trying to help people to understand the messages that we give kids, and, you know, we are trying so hard to keep them safe, but we really need to understand why they do this, and a lot of this is in the realm of quote-unquote normal, of exploring romantic relationships and exploring sex. Here's a link to you know, one of the videos, the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children in the UK, really good website with some really good materials. So the bottom line is that, you know, our kids right through to their mid-20s, they need our understanding, they need our patience. And I think one of the big mistakes, and again, no one's done it on purpose, when the threats of what can happen with respect to internet exploitation became apparent, the initial prevention messages, presentations, was all about technology. And we've ended up just terrifying people into thinking that if you don't know how the technology works and you don't know about technology, you can't protect your kids. And I think that's such a damaging message. Let's face it, unless you're in the IT field, all kids are going to be ahead of us in terms of the technology. And it's about relationships. And I mean, I tell people, you don't have to know anything about technology in order to have conversations with your children around, you know, keeping them safe and relationships. And, you know, there's a relatively new article that came out, and this is one quote that I'd like to read to you because it says it all to me. Parents are encouraged to recognize that although their adolescents may be the computer internet experts in the home, they are novices when it comes to intimate relationships and still need parental guidance and protection. And so I think we have to stop focusing on technology. Yeah, there are some pieces, and we know now, even we try our hardest, we put the software on, and, you know, so that kids don't have access to certain websites, and you just can't protect them 100% that way because offenders are always a step ahead of us. So let's, you know, rethink the types of things that we are saying to parents and caregivers in terms of the net and keeping our kids safe. And, you know, the research that we do have tells us that, you know, somewhere around 60–65% of internet offenders, they don't lie about their age. And they don't have to because they've manipulated kids into thinking that this is a real relationship. And a lot of times kids know, you know, how old this person is. And so, you know, that's not the focus. You know, you could be talking to someone 65 who, you know, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it's about the relationship piece. And these kids, so many of these kids really feel and believe that they're in love with the person, you know, at the other end of the computer because they make it their business to know everything about what kids, you know, at different ages are into, but, you know, they make like they're caring and understanding, and, you know, they've convinced these kids that, you know, this is romance, and they've turned it into something romantic and adventurous, and it's really, really problematic. A lot of these kids are very difficult to get them when there are criminal charges to be agreeable witnesses, but there's also a big piece here in terms of how we respond to them. And, you know, offenders, again, use this issue of rules. You know, you see they don't understand. They're trying to put rules on our love. And then, you know what? It's normal for kids to rebel against rules. And many of these kids are completely devastated by the loss of this relationship. For a lot of them, this is the first time they've been in love, or this may be the first time that they feel that somebody really loves and understands them. And a lot of these kids, when it becomes apparent, and it's often not through self-disclosure, it's discovery, that, you know, someone discovers something that's going on in an investigation, et cetera, and they're really vulnerable. Many of, you know, the kids that come here have suicidal ideation, and so, you know, it's not about being critical. It's not about saying, you know, he's a creep, he's this, he's that. We have to support their loss and not challenge the relationship. And, you know, meet this child where this child is, if we want to continue to you know, to keep them safe and to work toward helping them down the road understand what's happened to them. So, you know, again, this is an area where I think we all need more work. We're quite reactive, which is normal, and to step back and try and have some more insight and understanding into what does this mean to a child who's been manipulated and exploited like this. Another quote for you, another one for you. This is Finkelhor, who most of you, if not all of you, know. He does amazing work. And again, this quote reinforces, you know, it's not about technology. We need to come back to the healthy relationship piece. So the prevention messages, you know, pertain to online and offline. So kind of summarize and give some other messages. And this starts early on with little ones. You know, this is not about strangers. We do not want our kids going with anyone or being anywhere without our permission. And of course it changes as kids get older. But initially, you know, there are 4 rules that our kids need to know. Someone, whether it's mom, dad, you know, if you're in school, the teacher, whomever, has to know all the time where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, and when you'll be back. And, you know, it's pretty easy with young kids because we're supervising them or we're trusting them to the supervision of others. This changes, obviously, as kids get older, and we have to help youth to understand that it's not about trying to control them. We're emphasizing respect, safety, and hopefully role modeling. You know, you always know where I am, you always know where your father is, you always know, you know, where your nanny is, you know, whatever it is. And it's part of that, you know, reciprocating, and someone should always know where you are, even at work. I mean, if I'm out doing a training, you know, there's someone here at work who always knows where I am and when I'm supposed to come back, and if I don't show up, you know, you can be sure that there would be a phone call or a text or something saying, you know, where are you? You were supposed to be back here by 1. So, and I can tell you that you start this really young. I'm very lucky. I have 2 grown sons. One lives overseas, another one, you know, in Toronto. But you know what? Any one of us in the family, if we're not going to be in our homes overnight, or, you know, even if we're going, you know, somewhere for work for the night or whatever, there's that, you know, quick text or email. And our expression in our family is, you know, if I go somewhere and I'm come back to Toronto, it's, you know, on Toronto ground, safe and sound. If I'm on a vacation, you know, I've gone to Florida and I get there safely, you know, on Florida ground, safe and sound. And everybody waits for that message. And I have no control over my children. If you're lucky, money still works here and there. If not, you know, this is a courtesy. Stuff happens in the world, you know, ailing grandparents, whatever. Pertains to the computer, you know, the expectation. Where do you go online? What are you doing? Who are you chatting with? How much time are you spending online? You can ask. It doesn't matter how old the person is. You know, these are fair questions, and these are easy to supervise, as I said, early on. And I think we really need to acknowledge to kids, hey, you know, we know you guys flirt. I mean, that's a behavior humans have had since the beginning of time. Now you guys have the internet. It's a different medium. But, you know, open up the conversation and talk about if they feel weirded out or creepy or whatever, so that, you know, we get it. We understand. This, again, a link to a really good, I think, really good a piece to show kids. I would start showing it as early as grade 6 myself. The intuition piece, really hard for young kids to understand it, but we have to respect it. And kids start showing intuition, you know, in the preschool years, and we have a tendency on purpose, and I don't want people to jump to the conclusion of, you know, abuse every time, but, you know, a child who says, you know, I don't want to go to soccer practice, and, you know, the response is usually, well, I paid $200, or, you know, you're part of a team, or, you know, you're just tired because you stayed up too late, blah, blah, blah. Instead of just saying, how come? And it, again, I wouldn't want to go down the road of abuse. I wouldn't want my head to go there to start with, but, you know, you may learn something. It could be bullying. It could be they really hate soccer and, you know, didn't want to tell you or whatever. And so, you know, or some kids may say, I don't know, there's just something about, you know, this particular parent who coaches or whatever it is that, you know, just makes me feel weird. Because we really need to nurture that intuition and to help kids to understand that, you know, that's something very special about people, about human beings, and it helps to keep us safe. We need to listen to it, and you need to talk to an adult you trust if you have that feeling about anything. We've already talked about this, a summary. You can say no to any touch that makes you feel uncomfortable, but it may be too scary to say no. Again, talk to someone you trust, and only you can decide how trust makes you feel. secrets about touch should never be kept. Touching is never secret. All touching can be talked about, and talk to someone no matter how you feel. If you're not sure, you're confused, you're frightened, you know, again, showing that, you know, you're open to hearing anything no matter what. The next one to me I think is critical. We know that most kids end up being victimized because or a lot of kids, because they were somewhere they shouldn't have been, or they were with a person or people that they shouldn't have been with. Or they've broken some kind of rule. And I know a lot of this is, you know, parenting style, but this is critical to say to kids, you know what, if something happens, even if you broke the rule, I mean, we know kids break rules, adults break rules, your safety is the most important thing. And I think this, like I said, this is, to me, if I had to pick one message, I think this would be the one, you know, really, really key message. Because kids are more concerned with the consequences, and I'm going to get in trouble, and we make the connection for people that if kids experience harsh punishment, if they're being punished physically or emotionally, have a strip torn off them, they are not coming to you when they need you, because that's been their experience, and it's even harder to keep them safe if that's how, you know, how we've responded to things they've done wrong or rules they've broken in the past. You know, I'll share with a very quick story. Come home from work one day, my younger son, he was 16, in the kitchen with a friend of his from school. She's also the same age. Her mom, never met her before. My husband's there, you know, chit-chat, and then all of a sudden, my son's friend turns to him my son turns to her and says, "Oh, Jenny, why don't you tell my mom that funny thing that happened to you and your friends the other day?" And she says right away, "Oh, that's okay, I'll tell her another time." So I figure something happened, she didn't want her mom to know. So, you know, I ignore it, whatever. When they leave, of course, I turn to my son and say, "So Lee, like, what was that about?" Well, it turns out a couple days earlier, her and a couple of her friends were walking home around 10 at night, and they were allowed to be out, but they walked home through the park. And some guy came out and talked to them. They talked to him, and then he disappeared. And then when they were further along the path, he came out naked. And they hadn't told anybody, but my son, I'm sure people tell my kids things because they know what I do for a living, so they want somebody to know who can help them. Anyways, because she was 16, I decided, you know what, I'm going to call her first. To make a long story short, the entire focus was around that they were going to get in trouble because you're not supposed to walk through the park at night. And that was the whole focus, and not, you know, that there's someone in the park who's doing this, and, you know, we know that a lot of these guys do a lot more intrusive things, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, thankfully, I was allowed to, she said she'll get in trouble, and I said, well, what do you mean? What does that mean in your house? It was about being grounded, because I didn't want to set her up for, you know, if there was harsh punishment. Convinced her to talk to her mom about what happened. You know, we had a long conversation. Mom called, you know, got them to police, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it really, these personal experiences really bring this to life, so to speak, these messages. So, as I said, this is a very critical message. You know, other messages, like if you're ever somewhere and you're not comfortable, you want to get out, call me, no questions asked. And we have to live by that. I mean, and frankly, do we need to ask questions? We pretty much have a good idea of what, you know, what was likely going on there. The point being that, you know, they know there's a way out. They know that their safety is the most important thing, and you're actually living by that. Distinguishing between tattling and telling, and to keep on telling, which, as I said before, is, you know, an unfortunate message that we have to give kids. I've included a lot of things around consent, not for us to go through, but so that you have the information. Very important piece around keeping kids safe, around exploitation, understanding, you know, what it means to give consent, being realistic about kids and what consent really means when they give it. They don't really have the experience or the concepts of what it really means. Again, one of the times I was with David Finkelhor, he said something to me that years ago that has stuck with me and always will. Yes doesn't mean anything if no isn't one of your options. And I think that's a really profound statement, helping not only kids but all adults to understand that consent is not the same as compliance. And because kids have participated or gone along, does not mean that they consented. And even if they did consent, you know, did they really understand what they were consenting to? So I think that's an important piece here on age of consent, criminal code-wise, and then some more information around the differences between the legislation around child sexual abuse images, child pornography, and the relatively new charges around the intimate image sections, which is very relevant for our primarily, you know, adolescents and youth who are sharing intimate photos, videos, text messages, to have a better understanding of what this means. And again, I've included that. I think it's important to help people to understand when police may or may not investigate, because there's so much of this going on that schools are calling the police, families are calling police, and to understand in line with the legislation that, you know, that this list, that police are not going to launch an investigation. They may come and talk to the kids or come to the school, but whatever the image is, this is the whether it's sex or it's sexting images, whatever, that the age of consent falls within the legal age of consent, which is federal, as you know, that the two people involved freely chose to create the image, that there's consent to send the image. That's a different piece now in the intimate image sections, that you need the consent of someone to send an image to you, and in order, you know, for you to send it to them. That there were no threats or blackmail involved in creating or sending the images, that there's no sexual or physical assault that's depicted in the images, and the image remained private between the two people who made it. And this is valuable information for as I said, for teens and for youth. So I have this. I also have a handout with this information. If anybody's interested, you know, you can just email me or Signe and I'll send it off. Again, quotes that I think are helpful. Some other pieces around the criminal code that relate to online exploitation that many of you are talking to kids and adults about. Some of you have seen this. If you haven't, it's only like 2.5 minutes long. Consent, it's as simple as T. This is the link. Use this link because there are many different versions on the net, one of which has swearing in it, so you don't want to call it up when you're doing a presentation and all of a sudden they're swearing in it. But this is well worth your 2.5 minutes. Again, I'd be showing it to kids like as young as in grade 6 myself. More links, and you know, to me, we also want kids to get the clear message. I never, ever use the phrase, oh, now you've, you know, learned about this, you know, with kids, now you can protect yourself. I don't think we should ever say that to children and youth. I think what we need to say is it's our responsibility. It's the responsibility of all the adults around you to protect you. Because if we give them that message that they're responsible for protecting themselves, it's unlikely they're going to come to us when something happens, and it's not their responsibility. They're not able to do this totally because of all the things that we've, you know, that I've shared with you this afternoon. So there's my contact information. We do have a bit of time if anybody has any questions or comments. Signe is sitting there. Here are some resources. I also have a handout with additional online resources that I would recommend. So again, if anybody who wants that, you know, just flip an email, and I'd be happy to send it to you. So we'll wait a minute or two and see if there's any questions or comments. If you're on the phone, you can also ask.
Will these slides be available online? Will these be available online? Okay.
So once again, thank you very much. Thank you for participating. We've had so many participants. Our e-distribution list has grown to over 400 people, which is amazing. And I'm hoping that you'll be able to take a very small amount of time to do the survey, and hopefully we'll be able to continue. So thanks, and enjoy the rest of your day.